Everybody, thanks for watching. And just a quick reminder that Stock Market Volume 2 is not available, as well as DEFCON Delta. Make sure you guys check these videos out. We'll get into DEFCON Delta a little bit at the end of this video. We want to talk about stuff that's been happening lately with, whole Corona thing. But, everybody who's waiting for anything, tracking numbers have been sent out. Make sure you check your spam, check your email. Anybody else who's waiting for a tracking number, you will get it soon. The people who got the free audiobook, you will get that link soon. That link will be coming. We just taking care of the new site and getting stuff up on a new site. So as well as in a new download site, Podia. So thanks to everybody who used Podia. Hopefully all you guys who purchased through Podia signed up. Remember, if you purchase through Podia, when you finish, they'll give you an option to set up a login and password. Do that. So then that way all your videos are saved there that you bought, and you can just go back and download them, if you need it. So eventually we're going to integrate Podia into the site and just be using Podia. But if you have trouble with Podia, you can still use payloads to get digital downloads as well. If you're waiting for a link, email me. You should have got it by now. Check your email, check your spam. But thanks to everybody who's grabbing these videos. As I said, you want to see this stuff. Now, to get into this video, because we're going to segue a little bit into this whole critical race theory thing, and people got to understand what this is about and how they're going to use it and how they've been using it. So first thing, like I said, I always talk about forums and stuff that I'm in. People always send me stuff to talk about. And in my book, I talked about the whole thing with Anthony Johnson. And a lot of you guys already know the story. A lot of you guys understand what this is about, but there is so many people who do not know. And there's also a lot of Black folks who have wrong information about it and have no information about it. But it's deeper than just what's, the facts of that case, because when you start digging into it, you realize a lot of things about Christianity. You realize a lot of things about what was going on around that time when you start really digging. It's one of the reasons why I tell people to look into the slave narratives in the Library of Congress and understand what those slaves talked about and the information they passed down to each other through slavery, because when you're in a situation like that, knowledge is important. So what those slaves wrote in the slave narratives, it is important information to know if you want to be in a real understanding of this, situation and what was really going on. So I want to read to you just a post from a woman on this whole thing and just get you to understand the views of a lot of white folks with this whole slavery thing, which is completely absurd. So says here, this woman, Carol, Blacks have perpetrated and promoted slavery upon their own for generations. Here is an interesting tidbit that was just learned. By the way, Muslims and Blacks were the ones responsible for bringing Black slaves to America to sell to others. This was after they had shipped to Haiti and other islands. America was an afterthought. When the slaves were freed after the Civil War, many chose to stay with their white owners and work in a different capacity because they were loved and treated like family there. Think about what I just read. Now it goes on to say down here, the first slave owner in America was not only a black man. He went to court and demanded it. In 1654, note that date in your head. In 1654, it was time for Anthony to release John Castor, a Black indentured servant. Instead, Anthony told Castor he was extending his time. Castor left and became employed by the free white man, Robert Parker. Anthony Johnson sued Robert Parker in the Northampton court in 1654. In 1655, the court ruled that Anthony Johnson could hold John Castor indefinitely. The court gave judicial sanction for Blacks to own a slave of their own race. Thus, Castor became the first permanent slave and Johnson the first slave owner. Now, believe it or not, we was talking about this for a long time, and believe it or not, this is, part of critical race theory. And you got to understand why I'm saying that, because critical race theory is aiming to change history. And we're going to get into this in a second, but you have to understand one. First of all, what's a slave? A slave is a person you hold against their will and you force them to do work or what have you. That's a slave. So one of the things that you will find if this woman would have did her research, she would find that one, Anthony Johnson himself was a slave. Now, there's different stories about this dude. And one of the stories is his name was Antonio, and he changed his name later to Anthony Johnson. And then it says that it was the Portuguese slavers that gave him the name Antonio. And we don't know what he was calling himself back in Angola. So one story you will read, which was in the original Wikipedia entry on this. So I showed you guys before, I talked about this. Wikipedia can be edited. And if you're a person who goes to Wikipedia and use it a lot, and sometimes you go back and reference things, you'll notice it, especially things that's huge like this. So years ago, in studying this whole thing, it was completely different than what it is now. Not completely different. They changed a few things. One of the things they changed was the story on Anthony Johnson. It originally read about what happened to him over in Angola, that he was captured by the Arab slave trade and was later sold as an indentured servant to a company in Virginia. Okay, that's what it said before. Now it's changing that and saying that, oh no, him and what other Africans did was they used to catch passage over from Africa to America, and to work off the room and board on the ship, they would have to work as indentured servants. Now understand, even if that was true, it was saying that he was captured in 1620. Now slavery was already going on. What African didn't understand that Europeans was capturing Africans and taking them to America to be slaves? Now they're trying to change it and say that no, Africans were coming over to work in America in exchange for room and board, for the ship ride, and to be, have a place to stay and food or what have you. They became indentured servants under a contract, and they had to work off their debt. And then after their debt was paid, they could go about and be free in America, which is completely changing the history that we know and was taught about us being captured and brought over and working as slaves. Understand? So even if it's true, it don't make sense. So what the woman is saying and not realizing is, taking a person and making them a slave. Okay. What about the person itself? Now, one black person who enslaves another doesn't speak for the entire race of black people and makes it, some type of huge crime on our race that we are all responsible for slavery because of few black people enslaved others or sold others into slavery. That's one thing. Now, another claim on this whole thing is he was the first person to own a slave in America. You got to remember, he didn't make that man a slave. The court system did. It was the court that ruled that this man was enslaved to him for life. He didn't rule that. Now, the story is shady, Anyway, what type of person, one, if you were supposed to be set free at a certain time or date, why would you wait 7 years after that date to say something? So when you get into the story, supposedly, John Castor was upset that he wasn't set free, and he went to his neighbor, Robert Parker, who he supposedly had a better relationship with, and told the story. And Robert Parker said, no, you're free. You know what? You're going to sign a contract with me to where you're going to work for me as an indentured, servant. And that's what happened. So then Anthony Johnson, took him to court, Robert Parker to court to get back, his indentured servant, who I guess he felt like owed him more time. Now, what he would have to have proven in court was he did owe him more time. Now, remember, originally, the court ruled for Robert Parker and said that, he can go ahead and work for him. Then that next year that they appealed the case, and then Anthony Johnson won. And then not only did they appeal the case, they somehow granted, Anthony Johnson ownership of, John Castor for life. So it wasn't that Anthony Johnson, if the story is true, which we'll get into this in a second, it wasn't that Anthony Johnson somehow went out and captured this man and everything and, made him a slave for life. And he supposedly went to court because he felt like this dude owed him more time, or he didn't get the quality of work out of him he was supposed to. So he went to court to get him back. And the court ruled that he had to work for him for life. So it's not that, he somehow is the fucking overlord of all of fucking African slavery, this dude, and he just somehow, controls the entire system. And it's because of this one guy that Africans were slaves. This is the way they try to make it and justify as we enslaved ourselves, as she mentions. Now, the whole thing with the Arab slave trade, we already know about. But what a lot of people don't understand is, and this is why the Pope, he apologized because of their role they had in the slave trade. Because one, remember, the Roman Empire was getting slaves from the Arabs. Rome had a large role in our enslavement, and they was using the Arabs to enslave us. So this is one of the reasons why they apologized for their role that they had in the whole slave trade. So again, we understand one, and as I mentioned this before, you can sit there and say that, Africans indeed sold other Africans into slavery. And I got into that whole thing with Bado Bantu and understand that it wasn't everybody. It wasn't widespread. There were some who sold their enemies into slavery, and there were others who fought. If you do the research on this whole thing, you'll read about the Ashanti. You'll read about Bado Bantu, who got his head cut off by the Dutch, and they returned his head. And he was a king who basically fought to, save his people because he didn't want to enslave them. So they don't talk about that. They want you to think that we somehow created this entire market for slavery and we just responsible for our own enslavement. And they don't want to look at the fact that, one, if you buy a person, you are just as wrong as the person who was selling them. And it's not even about that, because even if you sold somebody into indentured, servitude, that doesn't give you the right to hang them from trees, to beat religion into them, to set them on fire, to have dogs rip them apart, to impregnate and rape the women, and then feed the babies to alligators. How does an African selling another African justifies you doing all these sick things to African people? It doesn't. So, her argument is stupid, and any person who brings up their argument is crazy for trying to justify this whole thing. So you have a free person minding their business. I don't care who it is that took them and brought them wherever they bought them. If they were forced to work against their will, they are a slave. They are not, responsible for their own enslavement just because the person who sold them was the same race of color as them. It doesn't justify what happened to them over in this country. And even if you want to, say that, what about after slavery? What about after slavery? All the sick shit that was done to black people, all of the lynchings, all of the murders, the racism, nothing excuses that. So we're supposed to blame ourselves for that as well. And we supposedly had done that to ourselves when it was white folks that done this, to us. So her argument is stupid, and the facts in that whole Anthony Johnson thing is way off. One, they don't even know if the Antonio they have on record is Anthony Johnson. They think he's the most likely person. And remember, if you do the research on this, 1730 is when all information on that family falls off, because after Anthony Johnson died, they took everything from him. And supposedly his family bought some land somewhere and they disappeared. So the information is sketchy on this guy, one. And they can't even really tell you 100% if that's the same guy or anything like that. Now, the picture that's circulating, and you guys seen this picture. This is not even Anthony Johnson. First of all, this man died in 1670. There was no camera yet. Camera wasn't invented until the 19th century. So there was no camera, no footage or photo of this man for them to just put this picture up there. This person right here is Lewis Hayden. Lewis Hayden escaped from slavery in Kentucky, and he basically, moved to Boston and became an abolitionist. The picture of this man, because you can Google it and you can look up Lewis Hayden, this photo will pop up. Same photo that's on this whole thing that this woman is using to say this thing happened. So everything is way off and wrong about, her whole post anyway. But they use it to justify their own guilt and the bullshit racism that they have, and trying to make it like, they somehow are basically, good people in all this, when we know the atrocities and sick shit that was happening during slavery. I don't care what a person sells you. They don't expect you to hang it from a tree. They don't expect you to set it on fire and do all kinds of sick shit. They don't expect you to rape it. They don't expect you to do all the sick stuff that was done to the slaves. So nothing that no person says can justify what happened to these slaves. Now, major part about this is understanding how it plays into this whole thing with critical race theory. So with critical race theory, It's people that want you to look at the legal aspects of racism that exist within our society and how that play a role in where we are today. Fucking common sense. But they're using this. This is a whole setup. Got to pay attention to this. They're using this as a means to delete history. So you guys have been seeing it. You've been hearing about it. So many people have been sending me shit, for months now about how they're getting rid of, all the history about Dr. King, the history about slavery, and that's one of the main things that they're changing. And this is one of the points right here that you'll see. Them saying that Africans came over to America. No, they wasn't slaves. They had to work off their debt as indentured servants. They worked it off. And that's what happened. And you have super coons like, Ben Carson come on TV and say, oh, no, these people are just being divisive. And these people are trying to make, young white boys feel guilty about being white and trying to infuriate and anger young black males and make them angry at their country. This is the narrative they're putting out there so they can change the curriculum and say, oh, we don't want to create these angry black children. So we have to change the history books or not even talk about history, which is what they want to do. We can't put this information out there because it's going to make young black boys angry at their country. And it's going to make young white boys feel guilty about being white. So let's not tell the truth, or let's change the truth to something that people can understand and accept. As I told you guys, a long time ago when my son came to me, he didn't believe slavery was real. When they told him in school, imagine that. He didn't think it was he didn't think it was true. He didn't think it was, something that absolutely happened.